The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, nestled among bills and advertisements, in an envelope older than the others. Its edges were yellowed, the handwriting elegant and precise, the kind taught in another century. Jonathan Corwin turned it over, noting the Vermont postmark and the curious seal on the flap, a wax emblem bearing an unfamiliar crest, perhaps a family insignia long forgotten. He frowned slightly, adjusting his spectacles, and opened it with the careful hands of a man used to fine paper and finalities. The contents were simple, formal, and yet strange. "To Mr. Jonathan E. Corwin," it began, "as the last living male heir of the Corwin line, you are hereby bequeathed the full estate of your great-uncle Silas Corwin, located in Windham County, Vermont. The house and surrounding land are now yours, provided you adhere to the terms of inheritance. Most importantly, the door on the third floor must remain closed. It is not to be entered nor altered under any circumstance." It was signed by a local lawyer, with official seals and notarization. No further explanation. Jonathan sat back in his chair. He had never heard of a Silas Corwin, but the surname was unmistakably his. Curiosity flared. After decades of courtrooms, ledgers, and client meetings, retirement had begun to taste stale. This, a house in the quiet hills of Vermont, could be the change they needed. A countryside refuge, an escape from the industrial din of Boston, perhaps a legacy for the children. He placed the letter before Margaret on the breakfast table that evening, after the children had gone upstairs. Her eyes widened as she read, lips tightening thoughtfully. "It's unsettling," she said finally. "That clause about the door." Jonathan chuckled. "Old men with eccentric rules, likely a superstition. I'm more interested in what kind of property this is. Acres, perhaps. A house with character." Margaret's gaze lingered on the last sentence of the letter. "Do you think it's dangerous?" "Of course not," he said with a wave of the hand. "It's an old door in an older house. We'll simply follow the terms. Keep it shut, just like they ask, that's all." Within the week, preparations were made. They would travel by train to Vermont, stay at the house and assess it firsthand. If it was as promising as it seemed, it would become their new home. Eleanor, their eldest, was thrilled by the idea of mystery and heritage. Caleb, their quiet boy, said little, but he didn't protest. The days passed swiftly. As their luggage was packed, Jonathan made sure to bring tools, legal documents, and Margaret's favorite books. Margaret, meanwhile, added wool blankets and candles, as if expecting the unknown to be cold and unwelcoming. Eleanor stuffed her notebook with sketches and questions about the Corwin lineage. Caleb brought only one thing: a wooden horse he never let out of reach. On the morning of their departure, as the train whistled in the distance, Jonathan paused beside the fireplace. The letter sat atop the mantel, its wax seal folded neatly beside it. He touched it one last time, tracing the strange crest with his thumb. He didn't know what waited for them in Vermont, but something in the back of his mind, something quiet and ancient, whispered that this journey was not merely a change of scenery. It was the beginning of an inheritance no one truly wanted. If you want to uncover the truth behind the Corwin legacy, subscribe to the channel and join us as we enter the house. The train ride wound through the narrowing valleys of southern Vermont, its wheels clattering a slow rhythm that lulled the children into silence. Eleanor pressed her face to the window, marveling at the mist that seemed to rise from the trees like breath. Caleb sat stiffly beside her, his wooden horse clutched in his lap, unmoving. Jonathan scanned the landscape, noticing the houses thinning out, replaced by wild, untrimmed meadows and groves of birch. Margaret kept her hands wrapped around a small leather pouch of lavender. It soothed her on long journeys, though today it seemed less effective. The carriage that met them at the station was driven by a man with a deeply lined face and few words. He greeted Jonathan with a nod, loaded their bags, and said only, "It's a long way still." The road twisted into forest, the trees so close their branches clawed at the windows. No birdsong, no chatter from animals, just the steady creak of wheels and the occasional grunt of the horses. It was late afternoon when they reached the property. The house stood tall at the end of a narrow dirt path, hidden from the road by a thick wall of trees. 3 stories, dark wood siding weathered by years of harsh seasons. The windows stared out like watching eyes. Moss covered the base of the stone foundation. A vine-cloaked veranda framed the front, its railing chipped and half-swallowed by growth. Margaret stepped out first, gripping Eleanor's hand. "It's imposing," she said, trying for diplomacy. Jonathan's gaze swept across the estate. It's solid. Needs some work, but not bad. Caleb hung back. His eyes were fixed on the third-floor window. There was no one there, only a curtain, unmoving. Still, his hand tightened around the wooden horse. Inside, the air was cold even for late October. Dust floated in golden shafts of sunlight. The foyer stretched high, lined with oil portraits, none labeled, none familiar. A clock ticked in the distance, though no one could find it. They explored in silence, their footsteps echoing on wood worn soft by age. Rooms were large, ceilings high, furniture covered in cloth. Eleanor peeled back a sheet in one parlor and uncovered a grand piano, its keys yellowed, one broken. Upstairs, Margaret paused at a narrow corridor. At its end stood a door, taller than the others, iron-bound. A rusted chain hung from the knob, and a faint discoloration marred the surrounding wood, like heat had once touched it. Jonathan joined her, reading her thoughts. "That's the one," he said. They stood in front of it for a long time. "I don't want the children near it," she said. "Agreed," he replied. "We'll block the corridor if it makes you feel better." That evening, they settled into the rooms on the second floor. Margaret unpacked slowly, watching the walls as if they might shift. Eleanor began a journal, detailing every object, every creak, every flicker. She titled the first page, "Day 1, The House of the Silent Door." Caleb said little. He refused supper, staring into the corner of the dining room. When Eleanor asked what he saw, he whispered, "There's something wrong upstairs." Margaret sent him to bed early. After the children slept, Jonathan poured 2 glasses of wine and joined his wife by the fireplace. "We'll clean it up," he said. "Paint, repair the stairs, bring life back to it." Margaret nodded slowly. "But some things here don't feel dead." Outside, the wind began to rise. Leaves scratched across the windows like fingernails. Somewhere deep in the house, a door creaked. Not slamming, not loud. Just enough to be heard. Jonathan didn't move. He met Margaret's eyes. They both listened. The next morning dawned grey and heavy, with clouds that seemed unwilling to move. Breakfast was quiet. Margaret stirred her tea, eyes flicking now and then toward the ceiling. Caleb picked at his toast, still silent. Eleanor was the only one who seemed at ease, already filling pages in her journal, noting the peculiar stillness of the house, the way the floors creaked even when no one walked them. After the meal, Margaret went exploring alone. She carried a duster and a pail, telling herself that putting the house in order would help her mind. Her steps took her up to the 3rd floor, even though she hadn't intended to go there. The upper hallway was colder than the rest of the house. The wallpaper curled at the edges. The windows at either end of the corridor let in a pale, reluctant light. Dust hung in the air like a veil. She stopped in front of the door. It was just as they had seen before. Tall, iron-strapped, with a black chain looped loosely around the handle. The wood was scarred around the edges, darkened in places as though heat had once licked at it. There was no keyhole, just a jagged gap where a lock might have been. She reached out to touch it. Her fingers stopped inches away. The air felt thick there, pressurized. She could hear something, faint, like breathing, but perhaps it was her own. Still, she stepped back. As she turned to leave, she noticed something else. The floorboards near the door had strange discolorations, circular, slightly raised patterns, as if scorched into the wood. She knelt and traced one with her finger. It felt smooth, unnaturally so. Margaret left the hallway quickly. Downstairs, she found Jonathan in the study, organizing papers. She told him what she'd seen. "It feels like something's behind that door, something that knows we're here." Jonathan closed the file he was holding. "It's just a door, Margaret." "It isn't." He considered her quietly, then nodded. "I'll have it boarded up if that makes you feel better." "That chain won't hold anything," she whispered. Later that afternoon, Eleanor wandered the halls with a candle, sketching the rooms. When she reached the 2nd-floor landing, she heard a tapping noise from above. She looked up the staircase and saw nothing, only dim light filtering down. Still, the sound continued. Not frantic, just steady, like fingernails. She climbed. She didn't go far, just enough to peek into the corridor. The door was closed, but the air felt wrong. She wrote in her journal later, "The 3rd floor is colder. It smells like metal and something sweet, like flowers that died long ago." That night, the tapping returned. Everyone heard it. Margaret bolted upright in bed. "Do you hear that?" Jonathan nodded. "It's nothing. Probably an animal in the walls." But when they checked in the morning, there were no droppings, no signs of intrusion, no squirrels, no rats, nothing. That same day, Caleb refused to go upstairs. He sat in the foyer, staring at the stairwell. When Margaret asked him why, he only said, "It's awake now." "What is?" "The one in the room." Margaret didn't ask again. As evening fell, the air grew heavier. The house exhaled in creaks and sighs. Jonathan poured himself a glass of brandy and sat by the fire, rereading the letter. His eyes landed once more on the final clause. "The door must remain closed. It is not to be entered nor altered under any circumstance." He had thought it was superstition, a relic of some madman's paranoia. Now he wasn't so sure. And upstairs the door stood silent, but not forgotten. Eleanor found the attic door by accident. She had been searching for old books, anything that could help her piece together the history of the house. There were trunks in nearly every room, filled with yellowed linens and tarnished silverware, but in the smallest upstairs bedroom, behind a faded curtain, she discovered a narrow wooden door almost hidden in the wall. It creaked open with surprising ease, revealing a steep staircase and the heavy scent of cedar and decay. The attic was cramped and dark, dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from a circular window. Crates lined the walls, some held tools, others books, and in the far corner sat a child's trunk, small, blue-painted, with brass clasps that gleamed faintly. On top of it was a thin leather book, its spine cracked, the pages curling. She picked it up. On the inside cover, written in graceful script, Annabel Corwin, 1871. She took it downstairs, heart quickening. The name was unfamiliar, but the surname matched. Sitting by the window in her room, she began to read. March 3rd. The snow still falls. Father says it's God keeping the house quiet, but the noises at night grow louder. March 7th. I saw Uncle Silas again today. He says I should stop writing, that words invite them closer. The entries were erratic, scattered with crossed-out lines, water stains, and doodles of faces, none smiling. March 15th. I hear the tapping when the lamp is low. I told Mother, but she scolded me. "Don't speak of him," she said. "He's locked away now." Eleanor turned the page slowly. March 18th. I went to the 3rd floor today. The door is colder than snow. It breathes. I don't like the way Uncle Silas watches me. He doesn't blink. Her breath caught. She flipped through more pages, skimming entries filled with fragmented thoughts, shadows moving against walls, mirrors that didn't reflect her properly, dreams that left bruises. March 21st. He said he can teach me to stay forever if I give up the light. I said no. He laughed and said I already had. The last full entry was short. March 24th. Mother cries all day. Father doesn't speak. The door rattled last night. I think he's almost free. Then, nothing. The pages after were blank, save for one note, written faintly in the margin weeks later. He is part of the house now. Eleanor stared at the final words, a chill running through her. That evening, she showed the journal to Margaret, who read several entries before closing it abruptly. "This can't be real," Margaret murmured. "It must be fiction, or madness." But the name, Annabel Corwin, she must have lived here. "Even so," Margaret said, her voice tight, "we don't speak of this to Caleb. Understand?" Eleanor nodded, though she wasn't sure she agreed. That night, she placed the journal beneath her pillow. She dreamed of a staircase she couldn't climb and a door with a hand reaching underneath, fingers tapping. The next morning, she awoke to find her pillow damp, not with sweat, but with something cold and sweet-smelling, like the scent of old lilies left in a crypt. Downstairs, Margaret stood staring into the cold fireplace. She didn't turn when Eleanor entered. "The door," she said quietly. It was rattling again. Jonathan insisted they were imagining things. Old wood expands and shifts, wind in the rafters. That's all. But none of them believed it. Eleanor returned to the attic later that day, hoping to find more. She searched the trunk beneath the place where the journal had rested. Only dolls with cracked porcelain eyes and one drawing, faded, scratched into the bottom of the trunk. A family portrait with one figure scribbled out entirely, violently, over and over. She traced the outline with her finger and felt something beneath the paper, a scorch mark. And for the first time she understood the difference between silence and being watched. The house had been quiet for nearly a week, the kind of quiet that made the family uneasy, as though the house itself were listening. Caleb spent most of his days near the fireplace, sketching with charcoal on scrap paper, lines growing more erratic by the day. He didn't speak much anymore. When he did, it was brief and strange. Phrases like "too many teeth" or "he hums behind the walls." Jonathan dismissed it as imagination. "He's young," he said to Margaret. "Sensitive boys often get ideas in places like this." Margaret didn't argue, but she watched Caleb carefully, noting how his drawings shifted from horses and trees to dark figures with stretched limbs and no faces. Then one morning, just before dawn, they woke to silence, and Caleb was gone. The house was locked, all windows shut, no sign of struggle. Jonathan called out his name as he searched, checking every corner, room and crevice. Eleanor, pale and shivering, climbed to the third floor against Margaret's pleading. She found him sitting in front of the forbidden door. His legs were crossed, hands in his lap, eyes wide open but unfocused. The door behind him looked unchanged. The chain still hung loosely, but now it swayed, as if recently disturbed. Eleanor called his name once. He didn't respond. Jonathan arrived and scooped Caleb into his arms. The boy was cold but breathing, blinking slowly as if waking from a deep sleep. He didn't struggle. They brought him downstairs. Margaret wrapped him in blankets, whispered to him, begged him to speak. Finally he murmured a single sentence. "He was calling me." Jonathan stood still. "Who?" Caleb blinked once, then said, "The man in the wall. He said I'm the key." Margaret pulled him close, her face white with fear. That night Margaret insisted they leave. "This place isn't safe for the children," she said. "You saw him, you heard him." Jonathan hesitated. "We don't even know how he got there. There's no sign of entry. It doesn't make sense." "Exactly," she snapped. "None of this makes sense, and we're still here like it's a holiday." Jonathan sighed. "We need more time. We can't just abandon a property like this without understanding it." But Margaret no longer cared about deeds or land rights. She cared about the strange humming she now heard near the staircase, about the way mirrors seemed to distort when she passed, about Caleb waking at night, whispering names she didn't recognize. Eleanor kept to herself, drawing symbols she'd found in Annabelle's diary. She didn't show them to anyone, but wrote long passages each night, documenting every sound, every shift in the air. The next evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Caleb stood in the hallway, staring up the staircase. Margaret found him there, unmoving. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. "He wants me to open it," he said, his voice flat. "He's still waiting." Margaret knelt. "You're not going back up there." Caleb's eyes shifted to hers. "But it's mine now, he told me." "No," she said, gripping his arms gently. "Nothing in this house belongs to us." Caleb looked past her, toward the staircase. "It does now." That night, Jonathan bolted the door to the third floor shut with a steel brace he found in the barn. He nailed the corridor shut, placed furniture in front, declared the matter over. But the house disagreed. Sometime after midnight, the air changed. The fire went out without a gust. The temperature dropped sharply, breath visible in the room. Eleanor woke to the sound of the chain clinking, rhythmic, like a clock ticking out of sync. And Caleb, asleep in his bed, began to hum a tune no one had taught him. Jonathan couldn't sleep. The events of the past week gnawed at his logic, unraveling threads of certainty he'd relied on his entire life. The house, once an opportunity, had become a puzzle he couldn't ignore. He told himself it was for the safety of his family, this urge to understand, but deep down, he wanted to regain control, to know the truth. At dawn, he lit a lantern and descended into the basement. The wooden door groaned as it opened, revealing stairs steep and uneven, the scent of damp earth rising to meet him. The light barely pierced the gloom. The stone walls were slick with moisture, the air thick with mildew and something fouler, like rotted parchment and burnt oil. At the bottom he paused. The basement stretched farther than he expected. A long corridor led to 3 arched chambers, each cluttered with junk, broken furniture, empty crates, rusted tools. But in the third room, something different waited. The walls were marked. Symbols, painted or burned, lined the stone. Circles, eyes, jagged stars, unfamiliar letters. In the center of the room stood a work table, and on it a series of items carefully arranged. A bell, a feather, a candle melted into a copper bowl, and a small bone carved with tiny runes. Beneath the table lay a crate. Jonathan opened it slowly. Inside were books, some handwritten, others bound in cracked leather, their titles erased or never given. He pulled one out, opened it. The contents were horrifying. Drawings of rituals, descriptions of invocations. instructions for calling things from beyond sleep and time, the kind of text that could only be described as occult. He closed the book sharply, heart pounding. Among the scattered pages was a torn photograph. A man stood near the house's veranda, dressed in 19th century clothing, expression unreadable. Jonathan turned it over. Scrawled in faded ink, Silas Corwin, 1869. Do not trust him. Another photo showed a group of people seated in a circle, holding hands, eyes rolled back. Beneath it, a note. Second séance, he came too close. The door was built to keep him in. Jonathan leaned against the wall, the full weight of what he'd discovered sinking in. This wasn't just family history. It was entrapment. Someone had made the house a prison for Silas, or for something Silas had invited. When he returned upstairs, Margaret was waiting in the hallway. "You've been down there," she said, voice tight. He nodded. "There's more to this place than anyone told us." "What did you find?" Jonathan hesitated. Evidence that Silas was involved in something. Rituals. Dark things. Margaret exhaled sharply. "I knew it. I knew this wasn't just superstition. He wasn't just experimenting. They tried to contain him." "Why would they leave it to us?" she whispered. "Because we're the last ones left." That evening, he called Eleanor aside and showed her the photograph. "Do you recognize this man?" Eleanor studied it. "That's him. From Annabelle's diary. That's Silas." Jonathan nodded. She was afraid of him. She said he doesn't blink, and that he watches even when he's not in the room. Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "I need you to be careful. No more time near that door, no drawings from the diary, no readings." Eleanor didn't respond. Her fingers traced the photo's edge. "He's part of the house now," she whispered. That's what she wrote. Later that night, Caleb wandered into the study and pointed to the portrait above the fireplace. "That's him too," he said. Jonathan looked up. The painting showed a stern man in an old frock coat, face shadowed, eyes hollowed by age. He'd always assumed it was one of the older Corwins, but now, in Caleb's presence, the eyes seemed clearer, and on the edge of the frame, someone had scratched a warning. "Keep him there." It was Margaret who first thought of the neighbor. They had seen a house half a mile down the road, old but lived in, smoke curling from its chimney some mornings. If anyone knew the history of the Corwin estate, it would be the one who had stayed. Jonathan agreed, albeit reluctantly. He didn't want rumors, he wanted facts, but at this point facts were scarce and silence more dangerous. The next day, he and Margaret walked through the thinning woods under a dull sky. The air carried the smell of frost, and branches overhead clacked like bones. They reached the cottage, just as a dog began barking from behind a fence. An old man opened the door before they could knock. "I figured it'd be soon," he said. He was thin and tall, stooped with age, eyes like slate. He introduced himself as Mr. Abernathy, and when they said the name Corwin, he motioned them inside without a word. The house smelled of tobacco and cedar. On the mantel sat old photographs, none smiling. He offered them tea, which Margaret accepted. Jonathan didn't. "We inherited the estate," Jonathan began, "from Silas Corwin." Abernathy nodded once. "Didn't know Silas had any blood left. But I suppose the house finds someone eventually." Margaret leaned forward. "We were hoping you could tell us about him." Abernathy lit his pipe. The smoke drifted in lazy circles. He was a strange one, kept to himself, spoke in riddles, came back from the war different, quiet, intense. Didn't sleep much, they said the veil was thinner than we thought, always talked about doors. "Not physical ones." Jonathan frowned. "What do you mean?" "He believed you could open something from the other side. Not heaven, not hell. Something older. Said he'd seen it in dreams, something waiting to be let through. He didn't want to worship it. He wanted to join it." Margaret shivered. "Did he live alone?" "After 71, yes, that's when the girl disappeared." "Annabelle." Folks whispered, but no one could prove anything. The family changed after that. One by one they moved away or died strangely. Your line must have been the one that got out early. Jonathan exchanged a glance with Margaret. "We found his books. Symbols in the basement." Abernathy nodded slowly. "He called it binding. Said if it ever got out it would consume. Not like a monster, like an idea. Like rot in the mind." Jonathan leaned in. "Did anyone ever go into that third-floor room?" "No one who came back whole," Abernathy said. "Your best option is to leave. Burn the house if you have to." "We can't," Margaret said. "It's tied to us now, and something's already stirring." Abernathy stood, walked to a cabinet, and returned with a small box. He handed it to Margaret. Inside was a silver key and a strip of parchment with a protective sigil inked in deep red. That key was forged to lock it, not unlock it. If the chain breaks, use it, but only once, and not with doubt in your heart. Margaret stared at the key. What happens if we use it wrong? Then you won't close the door again, ever. They left the house in silence, the sky growing darker behind them. Leaves crunched underfoot, and somewhere behind the trees something moved, not animal, not wind. That night Margaret placed the box in her drawer and didn't speak of it. Jonathan returned to the study, the photograph of Silas still on the desk. He turned it face down. Eleanor reread Annabel's final diary entries. Her fingers trembled when she reached the line, "He tried to live forever. He thinks he has." And Caleb, beneath his blanket, whispered to the shadows beneath the bed, asking if the door would open again soon. He already knew the answer. Margaret began dreaming of the door, not as it was, chained and silent, but as something alive, breathing, pulsing, waiting. In her sleep she stood before it barefoot, the wooden floor warm beneath her feet. The door whispered her name, not in malice but with strange affection, as though it knew her intimately. She woke each time with her hands clenched into fists and the taste of ash in her mouth. During the days, she tried to distract herself with chores. The kitchen needed scrubbing, the curtains replacing, the floors sweeping, but the house resisted her efforts. Dust returned moments after she cleaned. Water in the taps turned rust red, then cleared again. Mirrors fogged without heat. Sometimes she caught her reflection watching her after she'd turned away. One afternoon, while folding linens in the upstairs hall, she heard humming, faint and lilting like a lullaby sung through a wall. She followed the sound to the staircase, hesitating before the third floor. The humming stopped. In its place came a soft knock, slow and deliberate, from behind the forbidden door. Her chest tightened. She backed away, step by trembling step. Later, she sat by the fireplace alone. The children were outside. Jonathan was in the barn working on repairs. She opened the box Abernathy had given her, holding the silver key between her fingers. It was heavier than it looked. The sigil on the parchment shimmered faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. She pressed it into her palm until the lines left an imprint. Something in her stirred. Curiosity, defiance, perhaps even hunger. That night she dreamed again. But this time, she stood inside the room. It was vast, impossible in proportion, its corners folding into darkness that swallowed sound. The walls wept. The floor pulsed. Silas stood across from her, eyes black, mouth unmoving. His voice echoed without sound. "Let me go, Margaret. I can give you peace. I can give you understanding. The world is cruel, but I am not." She wanted to scream, but couldn't. She reached for the door, but it had no handle. Only a mouth gaping wide and smiling. She woke in a cold sweat, the sheets damp, the scent of lilies choking the air. Jonathan stirred beside her. "Another dream?" She nodded, unable to speak. He pulled her close. "I'm sorry. We'll figure it out. I promise." But his voice sounded far away, like it was coming from behind a wall. In the morning, Eleanor found her sitting at the dining table, unmoving. Her cup of tea had gone cold. "Mother?" Margaret blinked. "He offered me knowledge," she said softly. "He said he could protect us." Eleanor sat slowly across from her. "You saw him. In my dream. But it felt real. More real than this." Eleanor hesitated. "You didn't answer him, did you?" "No," Margaret whispered. "But I thought about it." Eleanor placed the journal on the table, opening to one of Annabel's last entries. "He tells you what you want. He gives you images that feel like comfort. But he doesn't love. He only wants the door opened." Margaret read the words over and over. That evening, as she prepared supper, she saw a shape in the corner of the kitchen. It moved just as she turned, vanishing with a blink. But it left behind the scent of smoke and something metallic. The same night, she walked into the upstairs hallway and saw Caleb standing before the blocked stairwell, his hands pressed to the wood. "He says you're almost ready," he whispered. "Who?" Margaret asked, heart pounding. Caleb turned to her, his eyes distant. "Uncle Silas." Margaret stepped back. Behind the wall, something scratched, soft, steady and patient. Eleanor waited until the house was asleep. The journal had been calling to her. Not audibly, there were no voices, no whispers, but in that subtle way certain thoughts return over and over, like a memory you never lived. She lit a candle and opened it again, flipping past the familiar entries. The words felt heavier now, like they carried more than meaning, as if they remembered. She turned to a folded page she hadn't noticed before, tucked near the back. It crackled as she opened it. The handwriting was shakier, the lines uneven. April 1st. There was thunder today. Father said it was a storm, but I know it was him. He gets louder when it rains. April 3rd. Mother won't speak. Her hair is coming out in clumps. She says the house is ill. I think she is. The ink was darker, sometimes smeared. A few lines were written backward, forcing Eleanor to hold the journal to the mirror. April 5th. I made a mistake. I spoke his name aloud. The door moved. Not much, but enough to let the smell out. Eleanor shuddered. Her candle flickered as though reacting. She kept reading. April 6th. They locked us in during the storm. Father thought it would keep him from coming, but he was already inside. Uncle Silas doesn't knock anymore. He just watches. The next entry was brief. April 8th. He says we're alike. That I'm like him. I don't want to be, but I feel it now. I see the house breathe. Then came the final page. April 9th. They've chained the door shut. Father burned the sigils. Mother prays, but he laughs at her. We're all afraid, but no one says it. I hear tapping from the ceiling. I don't think it's rain. If I disappear, it's because I went into the room. Not by choice, but because he called. Because no one can resist forever, not even me. He's part of the house now. There were no more words after that. Only a faint circle drawn in the bottom corner of the page. Eleanor touched it and felt the paper throb faintly beneath her finger. Or maybe it was her own pulse. She closed the book and sat in silence for a long time. In the morning, she brought the diary to Jonathan. You need to read this, she said, all of it. Jonathan read slowly, methodically, each line deepening the furrow in his brow. This girl was trapped, he murmured. They all were. She was taken into the room, Eleanor said. She didn't want to go, but he made her. Jonathan looked away. And now he's doing the same to us. Eleanor nodded. And it's getting stronger. Jonathan placed the diary on the desk, running a hand over his face. We should have left the day we arrived. But we didn't, Eleanor said. So we need to decide what we're going to do now. Downstairs, Margaret stood by the window, staring out at the woods. Caleb sat at her feet, quietly humming the same tune from before. When she asked him what the song was, he said, Annabelle used to sing it. I remember. Margaret froze. How do you know that name? Caleb looked up, and his eyes were distant again. She told me. She said she misses the sky. Margaret knelt in front of him. When did she tell you that? Caleb pointed upward. In the room. The air seemed to drop 10 degrees. That evening, Eleanor returned the diary to her drawer, but left the final page open. She traced the circle again before blowing out her candle. And on the other side of the house, the chain on the third-floor door lifted ever so slightly, just enough to let something slip through. The Corwin house was no longer quiet. Every night, sound stirred through the walls, scraping, tapping, a low hum that never ceased. The light bulbs flickered even when the power was stable. The clocks ticked out of rhythm. The family stopped eating together. They barely spoke. Margaret spent her time pacing from room to room, listening, pausing in doorways as if waiting for something to step through. She no longer touched the piano, or read, or wrote. The key from Mr. Abernathy never left her pocket. Jonathan kept himself in the study, poring over the books from the basement. He took notes, cross-referenced symbols, and muttered to himself. He looked thinner, shadows gathering beneath his eyes. Eleanor continued documenting. She now avoided mirrors entirely. They had begun showing things behind her that were not there when she turned. And Caleb had changed the most. He spoke little, but when he did, it was often in phrases no one understood. He refused to sleep in his bed, choosing instead the cold floor of the hallway near the staircase. Once Margaret found him drawing on the wall in charcoal. Circles, eyes, and a crude figure with no face. When she confronted him, he simply said, "It's what he looks like now." Jonathan decided they needed to leave. That morning, he gathered everyone in the parlor. He didn't ask. He announced, "We're leaving tomorrow. This house is dangerous. I should have listened sooner." Margaret didn't argue. She only said, "Will it let us go?" Jonathan stared at her, but said nothing. Eleanor packed that afternoon. She folded her drawings and placed the journal at the bottom of her satchel. But as she zipped it closed, a knock echoed through the house. Not at the front door. From upstairs. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. Everyone heard it. Jonathan grabbed the key from Margaret's drawer and the hammer he had used to bolt the hallway shut. He stormed up the stairs, heart thudding. Eleanor and Margaret followed, but Caleb stayed behind, eyes closed, lips moving in a silent chant. When Jonathan reached the second floor, the hallway to the third was open. The barricade had been pushed aside. The chain lay in pieces at the foot of the staircase. He turned, staring upward. At the top, the door stood slightly ajar. Margaret gasped. "It's open." "No," Jonathan said. "Not yet." He stepped forward, but Eleanor grabbed his arm. "We have to be careful. If we go in, we don't know what that does." Jonathan looked between them, then down the stairs. "Where's Caleb?" Margaret turned, her face drained of color. He was gone. Panic ignited instantly. They called his name, checked every room. He wasn't in the kitchen, not in the foyer, not outside, not in the cellar, not behind any door that would open. Then Eleanor heard it, soft footsteps above them. She didn't wait. She ran. At the top of the third floor, the door was wide open. Inside, darkness pressed against the frame like mist. No light penetrated, just a chill that felt ancient. "Caleb!" she screamed. No answer. Jonathan arrived seconds later, pulling her back. Margaret stared into the room, mouth trembling. "We have to go in," Eleanor said. "He's inside." Jonathan's jaw clenched. "We don't even know what's in there." "But he's ours," Margaret said. They stood at the threshold, unsure if they were rescuing him or offering themselves. From deep within the dark, a voice echoed out. "Close the door, or let me out." Jonathan froze. That wasn't Caleb. Eleanor took a step forward, heart racing. "Then where is he?" Behind them the air shifted. The door to the stairwell slammed shut, and for the first time, the house felt satisfied. The room was cold, colder than any place Eleanor had ever stood, as if the air had never been warmed by breath, never touched by light. The moment she crossed the threshold, her ears rang and her skin prickled. The darkness wasn't empty. It was thick, textured, alive. Jonathan held the lantern high. The flame barely penetrated the gloom, casting weak halos that dissolved before touching the walls. Or perhaps there were no walls. The room extended in every direction, angles shifting with each step. Margaret clutched the silver key, her fingers white. "We don't go far," she whispered. "We find Caleb. We get out." They walked slowly, calling his name. The echoes didn't behave. Some repeated, some didn't return at all. One came back in a voice not their own. Caleb. The floorboards beneath them groaned, not from pressure but from something else. Eleanor stepped carefully, her eyes darting through the black. Then she saw it. At the far end of the space stood a mirror. Not modern, tall, baroque, the kind with twisted bronze framing. But the glass inside didn't reflect, instead it shimmered, like water caught in moonlight, rippling with each movement. Eleanor moved toward it, drawn by a pull she couldn't resist. In the shifting silver she saw something. A girl. Hair in ribbons, face pale, eyes wide with knowing. Annabelle. She stood behind the glass, lips parted in silent plea. She reached forward, hand pressing to the other side. Eleanor raised her own hand to meet it. Margaret grabbed her wrist. "Don't. I think she's trapped." "She's not alone," Jonathan said, voice hoarse. Behind Annabelle, the shadows shifted. Something tall emerged. Too tall. Limbs bending wrong. A face that wasn't a face. It watched without eyes. Smiled without a mouth. And in that moment Eleanor understood. The room wasn't a prison, it was a door, a containment, a veil. And it was thinning. The figure raised a hand and tapped the glass from its side. 3 times, the same rhythm they'd heard all week. Suddenly, from the far left, they heard a voice. Small. Familiar. "Mother!" Margaret turned sharply. "Caleb!" He stood at the edge of the light, barefoot, clothes untouched as if he hadn't moved through the same space. His face was calm, his eyes too still. She rushed to him. "Are you hurt? Did it touch you?" He blinked. "He showed me things. Things that make sense now." Eleanor moved closer. "What kind of things?" "Truth," he whispered. "The house, the door. It's not just wood and nails. It's a path, a trade." Margaret's grip tightened. "We're leaving, now." Caleb tilted his head. "We can't. Not all of us." Behind them the mirror began to hum. The image warped. Annabelle vanished. And in her place, Silas appeared. Younger than the photograph, more whole, but his eyes were wrong, voids that stared through. Jonathan stepped forward. "Silas," he said, more statement than question. The man behind the mirror smiled, not kindly. "You should have left the chain," he said. The voice came from the mirror, but also from inside the room. It echoed through the walls. "I was so close, and now you've brought me the key." Margaret clutched the object in her pocket. Eleanor turned to her brother. "Caleb, we need to go." But he stepped back. "No, you go." The floor beneath them rumbled softly. The lantern flickered, then went out. Total darkness. Margaret screamed his name, and then light returned, dim and golden. Caleb was gone, and the mirror was cracking. The mirror shattered without a sound. Not an explosion, not a crash, just a silent shattering like glass dissolving in air. Where it had stood was now a doorway, rippling and black, a vertical pool that pulsed like a heartbeat. From its depths, a figure stepped forward. Silas. He looked like a man, but no man remained. His form flickered slightly at the edges, like smoke held in shape. His eyes were hollow, but behind them burned something ancient. Jonathan stepped in front of Eleanor and Margaret. "You're not taking him." Silas tilted his head. "He came freely. I only opened the path. He's a child. He is more than that now." Margaret stepped forward, holding the key tightly in one hand and the sigil in the other. "What did you do to him?" Silas smiled. "I showed him what you wouldn't. He understands balance, sacrifice. The way doors work, one must close, another must open." "You imprisoned Annabelle," Eleanor said. "You trapped her." "No. She stayed to keep me bound. Her spirit is loyal, but tired. You've all made it easier. Each fear, each doubt, you weakened the seal." Jonathan glanced around the room. The walls were warping again, breathing in and out. Symbols they hadn't seen before now glowed faintly in the floorboards. Margaret raised the key. "If I use this, you'll break what's left," Silas said calmly. "There is no lock anymore, only choice." A sound rose from the doorway behind him, a cry unmistakably human. "Caleb!" Margaret cried. The child appeared within the dark threshold. His body intact, eyes brighter than before. He was unharmed, but something behind his gaze was wrong. "Let me come home," he said. Margaret rushed toward him, but Silas raised a hand. "There is a price," he said. Jonathan stepped forward. "What price?" "A trade. Annabelle's soul, fractured and worn, still binds me. Free her and I remain. Let the boy take her place and he may return." Margaret froze. "No, you misunderstand," Silas said. "It is not cruelty, it is order. Without the bond, I bleed into the world, and I do not wish to destroy it, but I will." Eleanor stepped beside her mother. "You said he came willingly." "He did," Silas said, "but even the willing deserve a way back. It depends on you." They stood in silence, the room vibrating with tension. Then Caleb spoke. "I want to do it." Margaret turned, horrified. "No, you don't understand what he's asking." "I do," Caleb said. "She's been here so long. She cries when no one hears. She whispers to me in the dark. I can give her rest." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. "You're just a boy." Caleb smiled, gentle. "Not anymore." Silas stepped aside, gesturing toward the threshold. "Make the exchange. The door will seal again." Jonathan looked to Margaret, who trembled violently, then to Eleanor, whose face was unreadable. Margaret fell to her knees. "Please," she whispered. "There must be another way." "There isn't," Silas said. "Only balance." Eleanor stepped forward, pulled the sigil from her mother's hand and handed it to Caleb. "It will keep you whole," she said. He took it, folded it carefully, and turned to the dark. "Tell Annabelle she can go now," he said. Then he walked through. The darkness pulsed once, like breath held, then released. Silas exhaled slowly. "The house is satisfied." The doorway began to close, threads of shadow pulling inward like a wound healing. Jonathan reached forward. "Wait, will we see him again?" Silas paused. "Only in your dreams. But they will be his dreams too." The last sliver of black vanished. The mirror was gone, and the room was still. The door had vanished. Where it once stood was now bare wall, smooth, seamless, as if it had never existed. The house fell into a silence deeper than before, not hollow, but resolved, like something buried properly after long unrest. They descended the stairs slowly, each step echoing louder than expected. No one spoke. No one wept. They were empty and full at once. The next morning the house was brighter. Light streamed in through windows that hadn't opened in years. The dust seemed to lift from the furniture. The mirrors, once blurred and shadowed, reflected clearly again. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Her hands rested flat on the wood, still. Jonathan packed in silence. He folded what little they'd brought, wrapping it carefully, mechanically. He didn't ask if they were staying. Eleanor stood outside for hours, notebook in hand, but didn't write. She watched the trees, listening for the sounds that had once haunted them. None came. Then, as dusk settled over the estate, Caleb walked through the front door. He was barefoot, dressed in the same clothes he had worn the day before. There was no trace of dust or soil, no sign of injury. He looked untouched. Margaret ran to him, collapsing to her knees. She wrapped her arms around him and wept silently. He didn't cry. He placed his hand on her head and held it there gently, like comforting a mother. Jonathan knelt beside them. "Are you all right?" Caleb nodded. "I'm here." Eleanor approached slowly. "Is it over?" Caleb met her gaze. For now. That night the family sat by the fire. No one mentioned Silas. No one spoke of the mirror or the room or the trade. They simply sat, letting the warmth soak through skin and bone. Caleb fell asleep first. They watched him breathe, watched his chest rise and fall with steady rhythm. He looked peaceful, but Margaret noticed something small. When he slept, his eyes twitched. Rapidly, like dreaming. She leaned closer, and she heard it. Faint, gentle, a whisper from his lips. He was humming, the same tune Annabelle once sang. The next day, Eleanor returned to the attic. She opened the trunk where she'd found the journal. Inside, she found the dolls were gone. In their place lay a folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it. A sketch. Annabelle, smiling. Below her, the house. And in the window of the third floor, a figure waving. Eleanor took the drawing and placed it in her notebook. Jonathan boarded up the cellar. He sealed the basement entrance and painted over the wall where the door had once been. Not out of fear, but respect. Margaret cleaned the kitchen from top to bottom. She planted herbs in the windowsill. The scent of rosemary and thyme began to fill the space. Caleb spent his mornings near the edge of the woods. He watched the wind move through the trees. When Eleanor asked what he thought about, he simply said, "I remember," but he didn't explain. That evening the family shared a meal, a real one, the kind where hands pass dishes, where laughter isn't forced, where silence isn't heavy. And when night came, no tapping followed, no chains, only quiet. Margaret tucked Caleb in, brushing hair from his forehead. "Are you truly back?" she asked. He looked up, eyes calm. "Yes." She kissed his cheek. As she turned away, he whispered one more thing. "But part of me is still watching." She froze, then nodded once. She understood. Some doors never truly close. The seasons passed quietly. Leaves burned red, then fell. Snow blanketed the hills. Spring returned with cautious sun. A full year circled since the Corwin family stepped through the threshold of the house they'd inherited and nearly lost themselves within. They no longer lived there. After that autumn, Jonathan sold the property to a preservationist agency under the condition that no renovations touch the third floor. He didn't explain why. The man didn't ask. The Corwins relocated to a modest home near Brattleboro. Modern, modest, bright. It smelled of coffee and books. It had no shadows that moved on their own. No locked rooms. Caleb enrolled in school. His teachers called him gifted, quiet, observant, too mature for his age. He didn't play much with other children. He preferred to sit near the windows, sketching or listening to the wind. He never spoke of the house, but once, when asked about nightmares, he replied, "They're not mine anymore." Margaret began volunteering at the library. She organized shelves, curated children's reading circles. Her laughter returned carefully, like petals unfolding, but sometimes when she touched old books, she paused longer than necessary. Eleanor started writing. Pages turned into chapters. Her story was not about monsters or ghosts, but about choices. She never used names, but anyone who'd known what happened would understand. And Jonathan, once a man of logic and litigation, began gardening. His hands, once ink-stained and stiff, learned the feel of soil. He said little about that year, only that some truths don't belong in courtrooms or books. Then in late October, a letter arrived, typed, from the agency. The estate had been opened for limited public viewing, historical interest, guided tours, strict supervision. The third floor remained sealed as agreed, but something had changed. The new caretakers reported noises, sounds of footsteps, whispers behind doors. The coldest spot in the house was now in the hallway just below the old door, though there was no visible trace of it anymore. Still, one girl, part of the cleaning staff, claimed she found a drawing tucked behind a baseboard. A child's sketch of a girl in ribbons holding hands with a boy, both smiling. Jonathan read the letter twice before folding it away. He didn't show it to anyone. Across town the house waited, its walls freshly painted, its furniture restored, its grounds manicured. It breathed quietly, like a sleeper between dreams. And then, one day, a family arrived. A young couple, 2 daughters. The younger one was quiet, curious. She wandered from room to room while her parents spoke to the guide. She climbed the stairs alone. They found her moments later, standing near the landing of the 2nd floor, eyes fixed upward. "There's nothing up there," the guide said kindly. "Just storage and some old beams." But the girl didn't respond. She tilted her head. "There's something," she said. That night, the house was still again. But in the attic, behind a sealed door, the temperature dropped. And somewhere within the hidden dark, a whisper stirred, soft, like a name forgotten, being spoken for the first time in years. Years later, Jonathan sat at his desk, the same one he'd brought from the old house. He still kept the letter that started it all, creased and faded, tucked inside a worn leather folio. He had grown older, slower, but his memory remained sharp. And there were memories he couldn't let go. He opened a new sheet of paper and began to write. "To whom it may concern, if you are reading this, you've inherited the Corwin house in Windham County, Vermont. You likely don't know the full history, and you may believe what you've heard is rumor, local myth, or superstition. You'd be wrong. The house is real. The door was real. And what was behind it still is." He paused, the pen hovering. Outside, wind rustled the maple trees. He continued, "You may never see the signs, or you might feel them right away. Cold spots, whispers, things moved slightly from where you left them. None of that matters. What matters is the choice. You will feel it sooner or later. An invitation, a pull. It may come in dreams. It may come through a child's voice, or the breath behind your own. Do not open it, not even in thought." He signed his name, folded the letter, and placed it in a new envelope. He sealed it with wax and wrote only 2 words across the front: "For the next." Margaret passed shortly after, peacefully, in sleep. She was buried near the old orchard, beneath a weeping willow. Caleb stood at her grave with a single lily in his hand. He spoke no words, only stood there, eyes closed, lips moving. Some believed he was praying. Others weren't so sure. Eleanor published her novel. It received praise for its haunting prose and emotional depth. Reviewers called it imaginative, surreal, a metaphor for generational trauma. But those who had read Annabelle's journal knew better. Years passed. The Corwin house remained untouched on the outside, but within its walls, time folded oddly. Light behaved strangely. Visitors often reported headaches or déjà vu. Some said they heard singing from above, and still, the door was gone. Or so they believed, until one winter evening, a worker restoring baseboards near the eastern parlor uncovered a hollow behind the wall. Inside it, another journal, this one older, unfinished, pages filled with sketches, sigils, and notes. On the last page, a single sentence: "He watches through the walls." The house was closed to the public the next day, fenced off, declared unstable, left to the elements, but it didn't decay. No ivy claimed the roof, no mold touched the beams. It waited, because the house had never been just a house. It was a door, and every door eventually opens. Thank you for watching. If this story left you wondering what else lingers behind closed doors and sealed hallways, make sure to subscribe for more haunting tales like this one. Your curiosity keeps the darkness awake, and if you dare to keep going, click on the next video appearing now on your screen. There's another story waiting to be told, and it's already knocking.